Our guest today is R.W. Bob Goodwin, an award-winning executive producer and director of critically acclaimed television shows like The X-Files and Life Goes On. In a career spanning 3 decades, he has amassed 5 Emmy Awards nominations and 3 Golden Globe Awards for his work. He and his wife, Sheila Larkin, moved to Bellingham in 1993. Today, he and our moderator, our own movie buff, Kate Blystone, are going to chat about the Vancouver phenomenon, as well as Bob's experience in the movie business. Now, you may have noticed the coasters at the table. Those are for you to take. And if you don't have enough at your table, grab one from another table.
They're for after dark.
They're a reminder that tonight we're going to have an after dark gathering from 5 to 7 p.m. Because the room at Boundary Bay is being remodeled, we are hosting tonight at the Pickford Theater, also because we're having a little movie show. So join us for a free short film called Vancouver Never Plays Itself, free popcorn, a no-host wine bar, and more of Bob's scintillating conversation on movies, as well as excerpts from his independent film Alien Trespass. This is a City Club After Dark free social event, time to chat with members and friends. So I hope to see you and a friend who maybe couldn't come today at the Pickford at 5 p.m. tonight. So now let's forget politics for a while, turn off our cell phones, and chat about the silver screen. Okay, Kate, action.
Oh. So this works, you can hear me okay? I don't know if you saw the dressing happening over here. It was kind of exciting.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear about
I just want to thank you for taking a decade or 2 off of my career. I wish it was 3 decades. I'd be much younger.
Well, we'll get into all of that. Thank you, Jane, for introducing us, and welcome to you all. This is a great crowd. I'm pretty excited. Before I turn the reins over to Bob here, who's just going to talk forever, and it'll be great. And the story, preparing for this has been thrilling for me because, like Jane said, I wouldn't call myself a buff, but I do enjoy film and TV. And talking to Bob has been really interesting for me. I wanted to tell you a little bit about how this program came to be, because a few years ago, I was watching this show called The Killing. Is anyone familiar with that show? It was on AMC. Great show. And I was watching it, and it's set in Seattle. And you know that because on all of the wide shots, you can see the Space Needle, and it's raining. So you know it's set in Seattle. But then I started noticing something really strange, that every time they did a close shot and they were talking to, the characters were talking, I was like, that looks really a lot like North Vancouver. This is really strange. And so then I started seeing North Vancouver show up in a bunch of other places, not just North Vancouver, all over Vancouver and BC, showing up in a bunch of other shows that I was watching. And I thought, something's fishy here. What's going on? So that prompted a conversation with the City Club program committee, which I'm on, and we thought, given all that's happened over the last few months, it might be fun to do something fun at City Club. So that brought us to Bob. The thing that Jane didn't tell you is that Bob has not only had this illustrious career in the film industry, film and TV, but he is also one of the first producers to bring this work to Vancouver, to bring productions to Vancouver. And so telling that story today is going to be really great. And so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah.
Great.
And so when you know that I was one of the first ones you know that there were more than 3 decades. You know, the funny part of it is I didn't know. I was just doing some research. The first movies that were shot in Vancouver were in 1910. Yeah, it was Edison Company who was on the run from the East Coast, and he went out and they shot 2 movies up in Vancouver. But I was doing it was a company called Interscope, which is a small independent company, but they owned the rights to a story, and they had the script for what later became called The Girl Who Spelled Freedom. And it was a story about a young Cambodian girl who, with her mother and 4 young siblings, she was 9 and all the siblings were younger, escaped Cambodia. They spent some time in a refugee camp in Thailand and then were adopted by a family out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And they arrived in Chattanooga, Tennessee. None of them spoke a word of English. And the 9-year-old girl was named Lin Yan, and a year later she won the National Spelling Bee. And she got to go meet Ronald Reagan at the White House. So Disney saw that, and Disney was about to go on the air on Sunday nights on ABC, so this became the first Sunday night movie for Disney, but I produced for Interscope, but I was also interfacing with Disney, which was an interesting experience because I had started in production as a young guy, and then I became a writer, and I wrote a bunch of independent films that never got made except for one, and realized that writing was not for me. And I got a job as the executive assistant to the head of television production at Paramount. The same day I started, Jeffrey Katzenberg, who you've probably heard of, started as the head of, executive assistant to the head of feature films. So Jeffrey and I have been friends forever, and of course, at one point, he was over at Disney, and then of course now he's DreamWorks Animation. So Jeffrey and I, being frenemies forever, we would fight every day after he saw the dailies, and then the show got nominated for an Emmy, and he sent me a bottle of Lafitte Rothschild. But I got up to Vancouver because Interscope is, was a small company, and they wanted to do it as cost effectively as they could. And in those days, the exchange rate was very good. It was like 64 cents to the American dollar. And, there were only 2 crews. This was in the early 80s. I think it was by 81 or 82. And if you couldn't get one of those crews, you couldn't make the movie. Well, they had just hired, one of the questions was, how did Vancouver become such a big deal? Because now they'll do 45, 50 movies and television shows at a time, and they bring in, sometimes $1.5 billion. Those are just direct dollars. Those aren't with the multiplying effect that you always use. But then they only had these 2 crews, and there was a woman named Diane Neufeld who had just become the film commissioner up there, and she had 1 movie shooting and only had the other crew, which wasn't even a complete crew, but had most of it, and got me to come do it and help me fill out the crew and all. And once we were shooting, the next thing she did was ran to LA and got a 3rd show. She had no crew, she just, come on up, sure, you got everything you need, you know what I mean? And she got the movie and ran all over Canada to Montreal and Toronto and Calgary and gathered a crew. And she just kept building it that way. Every time when she had 3 shows, she did 4, and she did 5. So she was almost single-handedly responsible for really building that business up there. And she made it very film-friendly. So what's happened over the years is it's developed this huge infrastructure. We have several different studios, actual real studios with sound stages, and we have all the post-production thing. They have a great pool of actors up there, and for a long time, before the Screen Actors Guild stepped in with some misguided new rule, American actors could come up from Seattle or Portland or whatever. So we basically, I produced the X-Files. I was exec producer for the first 5 years of the show. And every year we won the Casting Directors Award for Best Casting. And 97% of it came from, either Vancouver or close by. It's a little harder for Americans to get up there now, but it doesn't matter because they've trained so many new actors and all. And it's so easy. For a producer who's based in LA, it's the same time zone. It's just like flying to a little 20 minutes longer than going to Seattle. And everything you need is there and ready to go. So it's attracting, an awful lot of business. It also has the advantage of being able to look like a lot of different places. And when they asked me to do the X-Files, by the way, you should hear this one because you'll hear people in Bellingham will get a kick out of this. We wanted to get our kids out of LA. We had 2 little kids, and they'd just done a big study on children who had been killed in accidents, and they did autopsies, and they were finding major lung damage on 6-month-old babies. And we just said, we've got to get out, the smog at those It was terrible, and we just got to get out. And we had three choices to go. I was born in Australia. My mother was Australian, so I have dual citizenship. My father was American. And I had just done a movie in Australia, and it was just the most wonderful place. I had so much fun. It's so beautiful. So I was suggesting Australia. Vancouver was another, because we both loved Vancouver in the Northwest. And then Sheila went to Bennington in Vermont. She wanted to go to Vermont. And I said, you can't get to Vermont. You know? And so what we did is, in fairness to ourselves, we spent 2 weeks in each place. And when we got to Vermont, my composer, who's done most of my shows, who now, of course, is very wealthy because he wrote that X-Files theme, and he just gets paid every time you hear it. He had a home in Woodstock, Vermont. I don't know if anybody knows Vermont. Woodstock, Vermont is the Disneyland version of Vermont because Lawrence Rockefeller lives there. Vermont's the poorest state in the Union, but Woodstock is just, he's bought all these buildings and houses and everything. It's just gorgeous. And so Marty and his wife threw a party for us at their beautiful, they had a pre-Revolutionary War farmhouse that they just really carefully renovated, and there was this big party. And at one point, Sheila and I were in the kitchen with one guy. He was a native, and Sheila started going on about, oh, Vermont, it's so beautiful, it's so wonderful. And he looked at her like she had three heads, and he said, you know, lady, if they had settled this country starting on the West Coast moving east, Vermont would be uninhabited. I could have kissed the guy, you know. Australia was too far. We decided on Vancouver, and then I started looking into the, Revenue Canada and that sort of thing, and realized that if we bought a place in Vancouver, I would be giving up a lot of my income. But before we even made that decision, in LA, we had a big house in West Hollywood in the central part where I could reach, because I was always an independent going to different studios. And then Sheila had a little 3-acre ranch in Decker Canyon out in Malibu, where the back property line was the Santa Monica Mountains National Wilderness. So we had a backyard of 300,000 wilderness acres. It was a beautiful place, and she kept her stupid horses out there. So we were going to go live in Vancouver, but we wanted to find a place, within an hour's drive where we could keep the stupid horses. And we would go to Vancouver for weekends, and we'd travel here, we'd travel there. And one of those trips, we came down and we went to Orcas Island. And we loved Orcas Island, but with the ferries and everything, it was just not practical. Coming back to Vancouver, we accidentally got on Chuckanut Drive. And I saw houses, and I said, people get to live in a place like that? We couldn't believe it. And so that's Bellingham. The next night we get back to LA. I was doing a series at that time with John Ritter, a thing called Hooperman, and we were about to start our second season. And in those days, we were real close friends with Sybil Shepherd and her husband, Bruce Oppenheimer, who was my chiropractor, and I'd introduced the two of them to each other. So we went over to their house for dinner, and a friend of Sybil's showed up for a glass of wine, and I'm talking about Chuckanut Drive and Bellingham. And this guy came from Bellingham, and his sister was a real estate broker up here. Do you know Edie Nienaber? I think she only passed away just recently. Anyway, she's a wonderful woman. She ran Fairhaven Realty. So I said, okay, tell your sister we'll come up next weekend, show us everything she's got that to look at, wherever, and maybe next spring, when I finish this season of the show, I'll come back and buy something. So we came up for the weekend, and they took us out to, to Lake Samish and Lake Whatcom and then Edgemore and this and that. And then they took us down Chuckanut Drive, and there was this place. It was this nice, it was a 60s rancher, but very well built on 5 acres, right off Chuckanut. And I went to, there were windows all along the west side of the house, and I looked out, and there was this real big backyard and then a forest. And I said, wow, this is great, you get your own forest and everything. She says, well, the thing is, the land goes down the hill from here, and behind those trees there's something called Puget Sound. And I climbed up on the roof and stood on the chimney. I could do it in those days, and there were all these islands and everything, and we bought it on the spot. It was great. So we moved permanently 3 years after that. But by the time we decided to move, we had bought the house. We're coming to move to Bellingham. I sent a letter out, or letters to all of the heads of all the studios and all the networks. By then, I was very well established as a producer, and I said, we're going to be in the Northwest in Vancouver, or near Vancouver. If you have a show in Seattle or Vancouver, let us know, blah, blah, blah. And we went off to England thinking it was be our last expensive vacation, and we're in our little bed and breakfast in West Kensington there in London, and the phone rings, and it's the head of television production at Fox. He says, well, we've picked up a new show. We know you're moving up north. We're going to shoot in Vancouver. We're only going to do 12 episodes, but who knows? It's called The X-Files. So, as you can tell, I'm the luckiest person in the world. My friends all hate me. And by then, the advantage to doing The X-Files up there was it can look like anything except Los Angeles. That's the only place you can't make it look, because Los Angeles looks like, the natural landscape is like the surface of the moon. And it's, but any place else, we did shows in New York City. We did shows in farmlands in Iowa. We did small towns in New England. We did and we always could find something in Vancouver that would play the part, usually with a little clever art direction and some sets. One movie I did was a documentary, docudrama about a couple who worked for the New York Times, or he worked for the New York Times, and they had a baby who was born premature. And it was a very moving story. And I'm terrible with names, but a very famous actor, and I'll look him up in a minute, was playing the husband, and he was from New York, and he called me up, and he said, listen, I've never been out there on the west coast of Canada, but I'm a New Yorker, and I just know there's no way you're ever going to make it look like New York. So please, can we just call it like some unnamed eastern city, East Coast city? And I said, I can't, because the rules of docudramas is you have to stick to all the facts. But I said, but don't worry. So he got up there, and the first day we were shooting down in Gastown, and I'd taken a side street in Gastown, and I built a fake subway entrance. You know how they have the railings around so then you go down the stairs, and did all this other stuff to make it look like it was really New York. And he came over and he shook my hand, and he was so happy, right? He was so happy and so clever that the scene was he was leaving his apartment and walking down the street. And so as he's coming down the sidewalk, here's my little, it was just 3 walls on the sidewalk, with supposedly the stairs. And so he did one of those Groucho things. He just went down the stairs. So that's one amazing advantage of the locations up there. Now, of course, you have all the infrastructure with all the studios and everything. But on top of it, they have amazing tax credits, and they fight with Toronto. So if Toronto comes with a little bit better credit, then Vancouver comes with a little bit better than that. So at this point, I was looking it up. They have what they call the production services tax credit, which is a refundable corporate income tax credit where a corporation may claim a specified percentage of the labor costs. Now, labor costs being all of the Canadians. So if you have some Americans working there, which is rare anymore, except for maybe the cinematographer or something, and the credits are applied to reduce tax payable, and any remaining balance is paid to the corporation. Well, Jim and I did Alien Trespass. Has anybody here actually seen Alien Trespass? There you go. Jim, look, there's 2, 3, 4. With Alien Trespass, Jim said he wanted to make a 1957 sci-fi movie. And I said, they already did that, Jim, in 1957. And he didn't care. And so I made him sit with me, and we ran 3 movies. We ran The War of the Worlds, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and It Came from Outer Space. And they were all really, he and I actually went to the same elementary school together. He was a year behind me. I didn't know him then. I mean, I knew who he was. He was this tall, blonde, good-looking person, and who's going to talk to anybody like that, So I never really spoke to him in the grammar school. But anyway, we went to the same theater every Saturday in Inglewood and saw these science fiction movies, and they were just, watching them again, they were great, they were scary and everything, but they were so out of style. You know, everything was different, the acting style. In the 50s, movies, you know, were silence up until 1929. In 1929, they invented sound, and from all through the 30s and into the 40s, and even the beginning of the 50s, half of those silent movie stars, they may look like this, but they talk like this, you know? So they brought actors out from New York. They were stage actors that were, you know, good with their voices. But if you look at like the 30s and the 40s, they're very, they're very stagey, really. They're sort of, you know, it's stage acting. It's not real. And it was only in the 50s that people like Marlon Brando and James Dean started developing a film style of acting. Well, the period where they made all these sci-fi movies was sort of halfway in between. You know, they were just doing the transition. So, is it Richard Basehart? Who was the guy in It Came from Outer Space? Is that his name? I think Richard Basehart, I think. Richard Carlson. You know, he talked like this. He was on the radio. But when he acted for film. So if he was scared, you could see he was really scared, you know. And so I said to Jim, you know, is this what you want to do? You want to do movies like that? And he went, yeah. And I said, but, you know, everybody's going to laugh at it. And he said, that's okay. And I said, I'm in. So if you come tonight, I'm going to run a little 8-minute featurette that shows you what the movie is, and then you can go out and buy the DVD. I'd prefer you buy it than rent it because we get more money when you buy it. But we had a fabulous cast. Eric McCormack, who was the star of Will and Grace, and Robert Patrick, who was the Terminator and Terminator 2, really good actors. And they all had to study these films, and they had to act like it. And not only that, everything we did was based on the 50s, you know. My cameraman would only let me use 3 lenses because that's all they had in the 50s. I couldn't zoom, or I couldn't, you know. The monster had to be made out of rubber, you know. It was really foam, but it looked like rubber. If you want to see it, it's in Rocket Donuts over in Fairhaven. It's got one big eye. You know, it's called the Gota. So we shot it up in Vancouver, and because I had a crew, I'd worked there so many times, and I had award-winning people who have won Emmys and even some Oscars, and people who have won all the Canadian awards. And so I had a top crew, and I was just talking to Jim, neither one of us can quite remember the exact numbers, probably because we both killed off so many brain cells in the 70s and the 80s, but I think these numbers are pretty close. I think we spent about $4.1 million or $4.2 million shooting the movie, but then with the tax credit, we got back $600,000, and that was in cash. I mean, they just give you a check. That's a big chunk of $4 million, you know. So that's why everybody started going to Vancouver and Toronto, but they preferred Vancouver just because most of the studios are on the West Coast. What's happened now is the United States is become the same way. And I have friends, I haven't actually produced a television show since 2004. I kind of had it with all of that. But I have friends who are still, God bless them, still at it. And one of them just told me recently, he said, if you have an idea for a TV show and you do a budget for the pilot, you have to plan on shooting it in a tax credit state or in Canada, because that's the way it works now. They're just cutting everything to the bone. And whereas, I mean, Vancouver's considered one of the number 3 in terms of production centers in the United States. And it used to be it was Los Angeles, New York, and Vancouver. But because of this new system of tax credits and everything, the number 1 city in the country for filming is Atlanta, because Georgia has a really good tax credit. And I know this personally because my oldest son, the one from the Italian, he'd started off in production, and he worked for the assistant to the head of a big production company that did TV movies. And they were grooming him to become a producer, and he told them he was not interested. And I said, why aren't you interested? He says, I don't want to live the way you live. What's wrong with 18-hour days, 8 days a week? I can't see the problem. But anyway, so he looked at all the jobs, and he found that the job that he thought would be the best, that would give him the most normal life, was accounting. And he started off on the Steven Spielberg movie as a low level, And he's now, second in command. He's about to become a head accountant. But he was working so much in Atlanta, he bought a house down there. He's got this beautiful house that was like a third the cost of one in LA or someplace like Seattle. And he works constantly. It's just amazing. I mean, I'll go down there. They have studios. They took one, in the studio he was working on, this one series was originally a fairgrounds in the 20s. And they had all these huge exhibition halls, all done in this beautiful, ornate, sort of Spanish Gothic style, And they converted them to a soundstage. It's just like going to Warner Brothers in the old days, with all these big sound stages and all. Unfortunately, Washington hasn't caught up. I had a long conversation one day with Christine Gregoire because she wanted to talk to me about, when she was governor, about getting more film. Because I did do a new version of The Fugitive in 2002 with Tim Daly, who now is one of the stars of a show called Madam Secretary. He's the husband. And Timmy played the lead. And, oh, by the way, Rudd Brown is here. And I think I mentioned, I was born in Australia. So if anybody has any trouble understanding him, just call me and because I speak both languages.
I'm sorry, more to the point, if anybody has difficulty understanding follow, I'll translate.
Yeah, all right. Anyway, she said to me, Christine Gregoire, I said, she said, how can we get more filming here? I said, well, you need a tax credit. I mean, all of the states that are, getting all the business now have good tax credits. She says, I just don't understand these tax credits. And I said, well, let me tell you this. And this was true at the time. I forget what the year this was, several years ago. I said, Connecticut, the state of Connecticut, just put in a tax credit. And the year before they put that in, they had about $200,000 in production. The first year they put it in, they had $300 million in production, okay? Do you understand that? And I would love to see more filming done right here in Washington because it has the same advantages as Vancouver. It's even better because it's a half hour quicker to get here from LA. It's the same time zone. The Fugitive we did there because you can make Seattle and the surrounding area look just like Vancouver. You can make it look like almost anything. And it's easier because it's American architecture. You don't have to change a lot of the stuff like we do in Vancouver. But they have a tax credit here. And I took a look, this is Variety, Hollywood Reporter put out a list of all the states that have tax incentives. And like, for instance, Connecticut that I was talking about. It's hard to interpret what this means, but it says their incentive is 10% if you spend $100,000 to $500,000 in the state, 15% if you spend $500,000 to $1 million, and 30% if you spend $1 million plus. 30%, and they've had movies there that spent $100 million. Think about it. Now it says under Washington, and again, this is why these are a little deceptive. It says the incentive is 30% for film, 35% for TV series with 6 or more episodes, 15% for non-resident labor, meaning directors, whatever they came from out of town. The minimum spend is $500,000 for film and $300,000 for TV. What they don't say here is the entire fund for the year is $3.5 million. You can't do one movie for that. And so they've been losing all of this business, When you do a movie, for business people who know this, if you do a movie or a television show in some place like Seattle, and I spend $100 to buy some props from somebody, they don't count on you just putting $100 into the economy, because that $100 is spent by that company or business to somebody. And so, like, it used to be called CTED. I think it's now the Department of Commerce, the State Department. They do this multiplying effect, and they multiply it by 8. So based on that, in 7 months with The Fugitive, and I'm just trying to think, I put about $300 million into the state economy in 7 months. And it wasn't fun. It was one of the worst experiences I ever had. The Department of Natural Resources was ripping me off for everything. Everybody was trying to rip me off, you know. They said, this guy's spending, $4 million an episode. Let's get it as fast as we can. Not thinking, so I went to Gary Locke, who was then the governor. I said, this is kind of crazy, because people are going to ask me what it's like filming here, and I'm going to tell them. And it's not good, but if you can make it good, and if I just, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I told Gary I did a multiplier of 3, because I was trying to be conservative. And I said $100 million. Think if you had 10 shows. That's $1 billion that goes in the state economy. It's non-polluting. It helps all kinds of businesses, travel, housing, hotels, restaurants, clothing. It just goes all through the community. It's a wonderful business, really, and in terms of the economic benefits of it. It's a pretty shitty business to work in, but because there are a lot of really nasty people, but there are also some of the most fantastic people you've ever met in your life. So get the good with the bad. But that's my pitch, and if there's anybody here who has any influence, and what's Miss Litton's first name again? Is it?
Christine.
Christine Litton, yeah, talk to her. I'm going to, and see if we can get more money here, because, it would be a great thing for a lot of people.
Well, I've got some questions for you.
I'm sorry.
You want to keep going. We can keep going forever. I hope Dale doesn't have to bleep you. We talked a little bit about this when we were planning this event, but streaming services have become so much more popular. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and they've all gotten into the business now of making their own TV programs. Hulu's going to premiere The Path tonight, which is a great show. I really enjoy it. But there's all these shows. How does that change what you do and what your colleagues do in the industry?
Well, first of all, the way you make movies are pretty much the same way you made them since the 30s, once you got sound in. It's not that different. I've done shows, like I said, in Australia, and I've been all over the country and in some places overseas, and it's basically the same. Right. It's basically the production. It's new technology. For instance, the X-Files, we were inventing a lot of the digital technology that now is like, you can buy it at Best Buy, it's like, so the technology changes, and that makes it easier and technically better, but still making a good show involves good taste and knowing how to get a story that's interesting and characters that people want to see and all this and that. So that doesn't change. The problem with the business has been, and that I'm just lucky that I peaked and quit at the right time, because what's gone on over the last decade or more is all of these different cable companies have come up. And so there's now something like almost 500 shows a year being produced, or at once being produced. And it's very hard to get good people to do that many shows, right? But also the effect of all of that, because the economics have changed. One of my writers is a guy named Vince Gilligan on the X-Files. He was great, one of our favorite writers. He wrote the goofy stuff. And he was just a writer. We called him a producer, but you call him a producer so that they have an office and they can't leave. That's basically what, but all they do is write. And he did a show called Breaking Bad. And Breaking Bad won Best Show, Emmy, a couple of years in a row. It was a huge hit. And he made a fraction. He was executive producer. He wrote most of them. He directed some of them. And he made a fraction of what, on that show, doing all those jobs, than what he got doing just writing the X-Files. But here's the difference. The biggest audience he ever had was 8 million people, and that was the finale. Their average was 3 to 4 million people every week. The X-Files, every week we had 25 million people watching the show, okay? On Breaking Bad, they did 8 to 10 episodes a year. We did 25 a year. Almost killed me, but we did it, okay? We get paid fees, producers, writers, directors. You don't go on like a weekly salary. You get paid per episode. So think of the difference. I called Vince because he's a great guy. He's a Southerner. And when I realized, I saw the first season of Breaking Bad, I went, oh, Vince, it's fantastic. And then I saw the pickup on the second season, and there was only 8 episodes. And I thought, well, gee. And then I called him, I said, well, I guess that's okay, huh? You do the 8 episodes, and take you, 5-6 months, and then you can go do another show for the rest of that year. And he goes, well, I don't know, Bob. Somehow it just takes the whole year, So you can see where the economics are so different. Suddenly, here comes Netflix and Amazon and all of these things. Now, they don't care about selling soap. They don't care how many people actually see the shows. That's not their business model is to get people to subscribe or resubscribe. To me, that's a whole new business model fit for this day and this technology. And that, to me, is the hope for the business, because there are a lot of people working because all those shows are out there, but they're not making much money. Right. Compared to what we used to make, I say we, my old folks like me, when we were, it's a tough business. And you can't go like it used to be, you want to do a TV, you want to work in television, move to LA. That's where it was. They hardly do anything in LA anymore. It all goes to Atlanta or North Carolina or New Orleans or Albuquerque, where they get all these tax credits. So if you're a member of the crew, if you're a costume designer or a props man or whatever, you have to live in a Winnebago. You're traveling all over the country. So I'm really liking what they're doing with Netflix. House of Cards, okay, at our peak on the X-Files, we were spending $2.8 million per episode, okay? House of Cards spends $10 million an episode.
It shows.
It's amazing. It's a good show.
It's a beautiful show.
It's a beautiful show.
Yeah.
I think it's great. So that's your answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and in kind of a related question, I have witnessed over the last, and I think all of us have, the rise of YouTube and Vimeo, and almost everyone is a filmmaker now. Now with Facebook Live, I could turn on my phone right now and stream this experience to all of the people who follow me.
Excuse me just 1 minute. Are you going to the bathroom, Dominique, or are you actually leaving?
It's an interactive program.
Okay, sure, whatever.
But it got me thinking about, we'll see you later, Dominique. It got me thinking about this, everyone's a filmmaker, and one of my favorite films of all time is Napoleon Dynamite. It's hilarious.
Yeah,
if you haven't seen it, it's great. And it was made for $400,000 in 2004.
Right.
It grossed $46 million.
I know, that's more than I make in a year.
And it was, that's more than I'll make in my lifetime, but that's a whole nother story. So, and these guys were really homegrown filmmakers.
Right.
There are a couple of kids that went to school together, and they went back to their hometown in Idaho and said, let's shoot some roll and see what happens with these weird wigs, and it was great.
It was great, yeah.
So, and that film ended up being a huge hit, almost no input. And you see YouTube and Vimeo, these little videos that people put on become these viral.
I know, the problem with it is they don't make any money with them.
Right.
You can go 5 million people saw it on, online.
Yeah.
Yeah, how much did they pay you? Nothing. And Napoleon Dynamite was, you're right, it was a huge success, but the director was an incredibly talented young guy, and now he's still talented and he's doing big movies. That's very rare.
Yeah.
And the biggest problem with those, and it's really harder to do now, as Jim will attest, is that used to be there were all kinds of independent production companies, and there were all kinds of independent distribution companies. So you could get your films into the theaters, but it's all, become just the major, very few independent distributors are around, and even they have become so big that it's just like working for one of the majors anyway. So the hard part is getting distribution. That's really the hard part.
So that's a question I have for you is, that film was produced for nothing, almost marketed for nothing. I went and saw it at the Pickford Theater when I was in college. And then you have a show like, say, Passengers, which is in the theaters now, totally getting tanked by the critics because of a weird plot twist that you'll have to read about. And they spent a ton of money on promotion, you can tell. So I guess my question for you is, in your experience, what makes a hit? Is it any way related to that level of promotion, or?
You know, that's the problem with the movie business now. The movie business makes less and less movies every year, and most of them cost more and more money. When we opened Alien Trespass, and you know, we opened in, I think it was about 14, 15 cities, and we had like a few theaters in each city, so that we didn't look necessarily like we were a little independent film, because we were in New York and Chicago and San Francisco, all the big cities, and we did a pretty good campaign. We spent, I think, about a total of $4 million on marketing. But the same weekend, they opened Fast and Furious 5. And they spent $150 million making the movie, and they spent another $150 million marketing the movie, okay? So on that opening weekend, we disappeared. You know, you can't compete with that. And we had this wonderful guy who was doing all our foreign distributions, Robbie Little, and he's a British guy, and he says, well, you see, that's the American system of selling movies nowadays. You pry open the mouths of the audience and jam it down their throats.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Yeah. So it's very difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult. But the good news is, because, you know, I'm forever getting young people coming and asking, how do I get started? What can I do? And this and that. And when I was young, I got started and I did a short. I did a little, it was 15 minutes. It was a little suspense thriller called No Apparent Motive. And my current wife, Sheila, was the star of a television series and just, you know, wonderful actor. And I was the location manager on the series. So as a favor, she acted in it. And then I had to put together the crew. Then I had to get camera gear and film. And then I had to get I had to get a lab to process the film. And now you can make it all, you know, with your camera almost, with quality. So young people, the advantage that young people have now that want to get into the business is they can just do it. That's what the technology has done. And it's great. You know, you still have to make something that people want to watch, but at least you have the ability to do that. You know, and the irony, of course, is that a lot of them don't. Yeah, I want to be a writer. Okay, write. You know, that's one of the problems. You get people that just they know what they want to do, but they aren't motivated to actually get it done. But now they can, which I think is wonderful.
Right. I want to ask you about Life Goes On, because this is one of the shows that you're really proud of, and it's something that's part of my childhood. It was very unique. I don't know how many of you remember that show, but it was on, was it CBS? It was one of the ABC. And one of the main characters had Down syndrome, which was really unusual for television at the time, and it's still, I would say, still is unusual.
That was the first time to my knowledge, anyone actually cast a character that has Down syndrome to play a character that has Down syndrome.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell me about your experience on that show. I know that you're really proud of it, and I'd love to hear more about it.
Well, first of all, I produced the last 2 seasons. It ran for 4 years, and I did seasons 3 and 4. And it was, you know, it was on ABC at 7 o'clock on Sunday nights. What else is on 7 o'clock on Sunday nights? 60 Minutes. The top show, the highest rated show on television. So we didn't have a huge audience, but we had a very loyal audience, and we kept winning all these awards because it was just, you know, a great human show. It was just wonderful. And the cast was great. I don't know if any of you are Broadway fans, but Patti LuPone, who was Evita, and all, she played the mother, and this wonderful guy, Chris, was Corky, the kid with the Down syndrome. And we had a great cast, and I had some fabulous writers, and I got to direct a bunch. I'll tell you one interesting thing. By the 4th season, because I came in on the 3rd season, and we developed a character. There was the daughter, Becca, Kelly. I'm really bad at names. I used to work with 500 or 600 people every show, so I just called everybody doctor, you know. Anyway, Kelly somebody was this wonderful actress, and she still is, and she played the sister, and she had a boyfriend, Chad Lowe, and Chad Lowe played Jesse, and Jesse was infected with HIV.
I remember those episodes. Yeah.
And I had an episode, oh boy, called Incident on Main Street. And Becca and Jesse were working in an AIDS hospice in the opening scene. It's night, and they're singing songs to this woman who's lying in bed. And they go outside, and they leave the place, and it's now lightning starts appearing, and a storm is moving in. And as the two of them are standing there on the sidewalk, they're suddenly surrounded by a group of skinheads. And they're moving in on them. And this lead skinhead is just the meanest, most scariest person you've ever seen in your life. And Jesse tells Becca to run. And then the skinheads beat Jesse to a pulp. And she comes back and she picks him up and gets blood all over her hands, getting exposed to HIV. Then they go back to the family restaurant, and the next morning in the family restaurant, it's been trashed by the skinheads, and there's swastikas, and fags go home, it says on the wall, the graffiti all over. This is 7 o'clock on Sunday nights, a family show. So at that time, Bob Iger, who now is the head of Disney, he's the CEO of Disney, was the head of ABC Network. And they called me and my co-exec producer, the writer, to come to Bob Iger's office. And they had read the script, and they knew we were going to shoot it, and I was going to direct it, and this and that. And he told me that we couldn't do it. He said, this is just too much. It's too hard-hitting. It's just, we're really afraid of what our audience is going to think about this, and I really would like you to reconsider. At that point, I opened my big mouth and did my usual, I won't, BS. And I just told him, I said, look, Bob, I swear to you, we're going to do it in the best taste. It's going to be something you'll be proud of. And he said, go ahead. So we did it, and it went on the air, and there was a guy named John Leonard who was the top TV critic in those days. He worked for New York Magazine, and he was on Charles Kuralt every Sunday morning on CBS. And he went on and did a review of our show, which was going to be on that night on ABC, okay? This is what television should be. This is the greatest thing It was like Macy's selling gimbals, you know what I'm saying? It was just, and I get a call the next day from Bob Iger and from Harvey Shepard, who was the head of Warner Brothers, where we did the show. Yeah, it was the greatest thing you got. You were just fantastic. The way you directed it, the writing, and I hung up and I turned to Sheila. I said, well, obviously, those two guys are going to get fired, because when anybody that powerful likes me, they always get fired. But that was, it was groundbreaking. It really was. By the one little story I got to tell you, which I think is a lot of fun. I'm doing casting for this lead skinhead. And the casting director brings in this guy. I've never seen him. No, it was actually his first time he ever auditioned for a show. And he had buzzed his, he had no hair, he basically buzz cut, and he was terrifying. I mean, he came into this room and he scared the hell out of me. I mean, and he read the scenes, and he was good, and it was terrifying. And he left, and I said, well, he scares me to death, but obviously we have to cast him, right? So we cast this guy, and he comes to work, and we shoot the episode in 8 days. And he's that way on the set. Like, everybody gives him about a 10-foot wide berth, and no one wants to get near this guy because he's so scary. And in the very last scene in the movie, which coincidentally, it doesn't always happen this way, but it's also the last scene we filmed, is where Becca and Jesse find out where the skinhead lives, and they go to his house, and he opens the door, and he has this adorable little 6-year-old daughter. So he does the scene, and he comes back, and suddenly he's got this big smile. He's the nicest guy you'd ever seen. Goes around, shakes everybody's hand and all. It was Jack Black. You know Jack Black? It was his first show.
Oh my gosh.
It was amazing. He was brilliant. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I cast him on everything after that. He was in the X-Files and all kinds. Hey, Bob, hey, but he's one of those people that get into character and have to stay that way. And the character was he was a murdering skinhead. Right?
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad I even thought to ask. We haven't talked about that show in our prep, so I'm glad.
I have to tell you one funny thing,
Yeah.
though. In those days, Sheila and I would go every Labor Day weekend up to a place called Cambria, up near the Hearst Castle there on the west coast, on the coast of central coast of California. And that one weekend, we knew we were about to be canceled. It was already pretty clear we weren't going to get picked up for another season. And Chris and his family were up there too, and so we were all having dinner together. And we were sort of talking about the possibility that the show wasn't going to be going on. And he says, "Well, I guess then they'll call it Life Goes Off."
That's awesome. So I'm going to do one more question, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. This is a question that came to me immediately, and it's super existential, and I apologize because it's weird. But so tonight, if you go to the thing, you're going to see City Club After Dark. You'll see Vancouver Never Plays Itself. And it lists all these places that Vancouver has played. And it made me think of these other places that Vancouver played, like in Marco Rubio's famous commercial, It's Morning Again in America. The opening shot is of the Vancouver skyline.
Oh, my God.
You can even see the little Vancouver flag on the boat in the picture, or the Canadian flag. And we talked about how Vancouver plays San Francisco, New York, all sorts of other places. Is there anything wrong with that? Is there anything? Are we messing with people's heads by?
Wait a minute. You look at all those big studio movies that were done in the 50s and the 60s, and they were set in Rome or wherever, and they would send a second unit off to Rome and do background shots, and everything was shot in LA. I mean, it's been doing it forever.
Yeah.
What the advantage to Vancouver is you can go outside and actually make it look like other places. That thing I told you about the girl that spelled freedom, we had to do the sequence where she was in this refugee camp in Thailand. And I built a 2.5-acre set of a refugee camp in Ladner, down in the Delta, up here. And it looked just like a real, I mean, I did amazing research. Our people really knew what they were doing. And I brought the real girl. She came out from Chattanooga, and she was in my car, and I was driving her out to show her the set. And as we're driving into this camp, she was like looking, and she was getting really upset. And then 2 Thai soldiers came by with extras. She actually was terrified. We actually had to calm her down. It was so real. When you see the movie, I'm sure nowadays you can run it on YouTube or get it somewhere. You believe you're in Thailand. You can just do anything except LA. It's hard to do LA.
LA only plays itself.
Yeah, right. And unfortunately, they took the X-Files to LA, and it looked like it was in LA all the time.
Right.
So.
Well, okay, so we'll open it up now to audience questions. Who's going to be floating around? Stan, and who has the other mic? Patricia has the other mic.
I just have to say one thing before we end, or I'll get killed. I'm on the advisory board of the Cascadia International Women's Film Festival, which is premiering this April at the Pickford and the Mount Baker Theater. And there's some cards over there by the coffee urn if anybody wants any information. And Cheryl Crooks is here, who's the founder and head of the board, and my wife is on the board. And did Megan come? Is she here? No. Anyway, so if you want to, I'm just warning you, she's here. So she may come at you. All right.
So just as a reminder, we open the questions to City Club members first, and then after that, and Patricia's got one, so let's start.
My name's Amy Glasser, and I'm wondering, with the new administration, does the movie industry worry about the effect of censoring or making some types of stipulations of what kind of movies you can make, where you can make it, and what content you can have in the movies?
I couldn't tell you. I mean, nobody. First of all, I don't even want to think about the new administration. And my advice to most people is try not to, because we don't have a lot of control over what happens. We do have a wonderful governmental system, and we survived, Mr. Trump's favorite, Andrew Jackson, and we've U.S. Grant, and some really bad Herbert Hoover. So I'm just hoping we survive. Nothing he said would lead me to think that he's going to bring in any censorship or anything.
It's all going to be reality TV.
Yeah, right. That's right.
My name is Cheryl Crooks, and I am the executive director of the Cascadia International Women's Film Festival that Bob has so graciously been advisory board on. I just want to, it's more of a comment, and you can comment on this. There are like 700 members of the Whatcom County Filmmakers Facebook page. That's people in Whatcom County who are working in film or would like to be working film, something related to film. That's how many, just in Whatcom County alone, are interested in that area. There was something called the Bellingham Film, if you're familiar with that. It's run with a woman named Avielle Heath. They just recently went down last Friday to talk to the state, I think Washington Filmworks, about this issue of tax credits for bringing film into the state, because we're losing a lot to Oregon, for example, which is doing a bang-up business down there. And I would just encourage all of you, it's a huge, could be a huge influence into our economics. And I don't know if you have some other ideas about that. Well, I don't know if you have an idea about that, Bob, as to how people here can locally be involved.
Yeah, well, it is called Washington Filmworks, and the woman that runs it is named Amy Lillard. And she sent me some information, and here's, oh, do I not have it? I thought I brought it. She actually sent me some information about just the District 40. And there has been some filming here, you know. I mean, not nearly enough. But she says, in this information sheet, that they do a $10, the 10 times that, for $10 of benefits for every $1 invested. Since 2007, 116 million is in direct state spending. That's without the 10 multiplier. And you know, out of that 116, I put in about 35 or 40. So that's one show. So there hasn't been a lot of stuff, and I just can't see why it's not more attractive to people down there. I'm going to go down myself. March 13th, they're having a cocktail party for the legislators, and I'll be down there to meet them. And you know, I'm going to try and do what I can. You know, I'll meet with Inslee. You know, I'll talk to them. I don't have any personal gain in it anymore because I'm not really going to be doing much more production, except for I'm working on a movie with the Lummies, which is going to be amazing if we can get it done.
I want to follow up just real quick on that same subject, if I can, because some of the questions that we talked about in the program committee, one of the things that came up is, are there any cons to communities that take on film production? I know you face some pretty stiff disagreement from folks down in Pioneer Square.
Oh my God, our first show. This is The Fugitive. You know, we're spending a lot of money, and we're very, you know, there are some irresponsible producers and companies who will come in and not take good care of the locations or leave them. You know, the famous story was the Route 66. There was a guy, his name was Sam Manners, who was the production manager. And he was famous because they really did Route 66 by going from one town to the next, you know, all along Route 66. And every time they finished in a town, they'd leave and he would never pay anybody, you know what I mean? So there are nefarious people, but for the most part, there's not. I mean, we're all, especially now, because you don't want to burn locations because you want to keep going back to them, you know? So the only thing is, yes, if you're shooting in a neighborhood, we do have what we call the circus, which is probably 4 blocks long, full of trucks and makeup trailers and wardrobe and dressing rooms and props, and you know, so it does. But we also have police officers always with us to keep the traffic flowing and all. So we'll stop traffic during a shot, but then let them go. I mean, to me, that's a minor inconvenience. That's about the worst of it, I think. Yeah.
Any other questions? Got one right here.
This is a question from my grandson, who has been watching the new series that have come out, The Crown, Victoria. There's one on Henry VIII that's coming up. He says, what's up with this? He's 17 years old and he can't figure out what is the fascination with British history right now. What's going on?
Downton Abbey.
I don't know. You could ask my wife because she loves all that stuff. Yeah, Downton Abbey, and you know, I mean, I kind of like it myself. I mean, I kind of like watching all that stuff, all that grand stuff. And the great thing about those shows, you know, if you're a producer, and I have some dear friends over there, and if you think showbiz people in the United States are crazy, go to England. They are bonkers. I mean, but all those wonderful locations are just there. Castles and manor houses and all of that stuff. You need a house with a thatched roof. It's just go there. I mean, here we have to build all that, you know, and it's very expensive. So, and they have wonderful costume houses and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. I enjoyed your talk a great deal, and I would like to see the arts flourish. But I would like to ask you a favor. If you're going to be meeting with the legislators in Olympia and urging them to adopt some kind of tax credits for the industry, would you please put in a word that they need to fully fund our schools?
Oh.
Because we have a desperate problem here.
I'll say, yeah.
Take that on, too. Thank you.
I will. Okay, you got it.
We can open it up to non-members as well, if there are questions from non-members.
I think Stan wants that. So.
Stan, ask your question.
Could you take a minute and tell us what you're doing with the Lummies? I'm kind of curious about that.
Well, my new best friend is Daryl Hilaire, who seriously, my new best friend. I just love the guy. And he told me this story about his grandfather. His English name was Frank Hilaire, but his Lummi name was Haytaluk. And in 1855, when all the Salish tribes were asked to go down to Point Elliott at Mukilteo to sign the treaties with this awful man named Isaac Stevens, who was the governor of the Washington Territory, all Stevens was trying to do was to get people to sign documents and put them in a file, because once he legally got it done, then they could just betray all the tribes, which they did, and you know, took everything away, took all their fishing sites. They had been promised all their fishing sites forever. And Haytaluk was brought down there. He was 8 years old. And the reason he went down, there were about 50 Lummies, but they all went, the Swinomish and the Tsunamish and the Mecca and all, I mean, all of the tribes went down there. And they brought these young kids because they had no written history. And these kids were there that every night at the campfire, they would drill into these little 8-year-olds what they were being promised by this guy, Isaac Stevens. And then, just as I said, they all signed the treaty, and the next thing, they were just, it's horrifying what happened to these people. I mean, there's this letter from Chief Seattle, who was Suquamish and Duwamish, he begging, because Stevens said, well, here's what we're promising, this is what you're going to get, but we have to get the great white chief in Washington, D.C. to approve it. And then it never happened. And there's a letter that Seattle wrote like 2 years after this, like 1857, and it just breaks your heart. He says, when is this great white chief going to sign off on this? Half my tribe died over the winter. We're sleeping on the ground. You know, they burned down their longhouses and all. Anyhow, so Haytaluk was there. He was 8. It wasn't until 1927 that the Congress passed a law that would allow the tribes to sue the U.S. government. So a lot of the Salish tribes, including the Lummies and Suquamish and all these people, filed a lawsuit against the government saying that they had been not given all they were promised in these treaties, and they were suing for reparations. They wanted money. And so at that point, Haytaluk was 82. And there were still, I think, 5 other elders who had been there as kids. And they sat down with that generation. One of them was Haytaluk's son, was Daryl's great uncle, Joe, who were filing this suit. And the elders, in detail, established everything that they were promised. And so when they went to court, this all came out in court, and it was in the court record. And the judge actually didn't disagree. He sided with the tribes. He says, "You're right. This is It's true. You were promised all this, and you weren't given it, and you do deserve reparations. However, the business of Indian affairs has been so good to you for the last 70 years, and they've spent so much money that you actually owe us more money than we owe you." But it got into the record, and as the years went on, there were trials in the 40s and then the 50s and the 60s, and ultimately the Bolt decision, which of course made them all, what's the word I'm looking for? They're all separate nations, really. There, and it was, so I'm doing the story of that whole story which ends, I mean, we were already working on it when May 9th came, and the Army Corps of Engineers turned down the coal port. And so I said, wow, we've got the ending, you know. So, but I'm doing it as a personal saga. It's about the people like Hey the Look and Joe and Daryl, you know, all these. So it's told through the eyes and ears of the people actually living it. And there's going to be some really rough stuff, you know, really terrible stuff. And they were taking all the kids away and putting them in government schools and making them dress in Western dress and not speak their language and lose all of their heritage. I mean, just imagine the parents and grandparents standing there watching their kids being taken away. I mean, there was violence, there was a lot of, but in the end, the reason I like the story is the Lummies and some of the other groups never gave up. They kept fighting and fighting. And I think it's, you know, a good universal story for all indigenous people because, you know, Western civilization has not been kind to natives, you know.
I think we can take one more question, then we'll wrap up.
Thank you. You had some interesting commentary, I thought, about the way the industry has changed over the years in terms of the way that production methods have changed, the way that locations have changed, the way that distribution has changed. And you touched briefly on writing and the way that that the content, I suppose, is produced. Now, getting back to what Kate had mentioned about the rise of, I guess, so-called reality content, reality television or unscripted television, and it's been sort of more and more popular over the past 10 or 15 years. I wonder if you had any comments about how that's changed the way that you see the industry.
My oldest son was a big fan of Survivor, and I called him a traitor. I think, you know, I don't watch the shows, and it's like eating your young, to be honest with you, because when you produce a good television series like The X-Files or some of the others, Lost, and things that can be, you know, you then get you rerun the shows, you know, they can rerun, and there's a back end. I mean, the DVDs have kind of gone by the wayside, but streaming still brings in a lot of money. We actually did pretty well with the streaming on the Alien Trespass there. But when you watch a reality show, you're never going to watch a rerun. It's dead. And they make them for almost nothing. They pay their crews and directors and people nothing. And it is such a misnomer about unscripted, because they have writers that write all this stuff. You can't tell me that The Bachelorette knows how to speak 6 words in a row together. It makes sense.
Let alone The Bachelor.
So I'm not a big fan of reality shows.
Okay, just one more.
I couldn't see her, and
It's
so.
okay. Let's do it.
Hi, Bob.
Hi.
So I've been studying a lot about whitewashing and yellowface issues, lack of diversity in Hollywood, and I was wondering what your thoughts are on that, especially since Vancouver is one of the most diverse cities in the world.
Well,
Great question.
I mean, on Alien Trespass, Jim and I hired a woman named Cheryl Boone Isaacs. Cheryl Boone Isaacs is a black woman who is the president of the Motion Picture Academy. And last year it was Oscars So White. Remember, there was not one black actor. There was no. I called her up last night and I said, you know, I don't want to complain, but I think they're really a little too black this year. I think it's been great. This year has been wonderful. Look at, if you haven't seen Moonlight, oh my God, it's just amazing. And the acting. Fences, which is really more of a film play, but if you want to see acting, oh my God, it's just brilliant. I'm all for diversity. I would always, when I was casting my shows, many times I would cast against character. I would cast black people or Latinos or whatever, even if it wasn't written in the script. I had one problem with that. I did a show called Secrets of a Married Man, and it was William Shatner, who was married to Michelle Phillips, who was a knockout, you know, from the Mamas and the Papas. We had 2 beautiful kids, but he became obsessed with prostitutes. And he ultimately has an affair with this, basically a high-class prostitute, Sybil Shepherd. And then in the end, he breaks up with her, And then she goes back out on the street, and they find out that he actually has a pimp, you know, and she has a pimp, and there's this. And so I was going to cast the pimp. I wanted to cast some really upper crust white person in a Rolls Royce or something, and they wouldn't let me do it. They made me cast a black guy. So I said, okay. I got him the Rolls Royce. No, I got him a Jaguar. That's right. I got him a Jaguar. I dressed him in Brooks Brothers. Glenn Turman, wonderful actor, very elegant, well-spoken. So I went totally against type. Instead of the big hat and all that, you know, and the Cadillac and all that kind of stuff. But I'm always for diversity. I always have been. I'll tell you one funny story though. At one point, Glenn Turman, as the pimp, catches up with William Shatner, and there's a scene where he grabs Shatner, he's on the street, and he's dragging him over to his Jaguar. He's got a knife. And we were rehearsing it, and Bill, who everybody now knows is funny, but in those days he was Captain Kirk. And in the rehearsal, he's being dragged over by this black man, and he yells, "Help! Help! He's putting me in a Jaguar, it'll never start."
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Everyone join me in thanking Bob Goodwin.